Welcome to another FACEHAMMER faction video for Age of Sigmar 3, and in this video we're going to talk about the Grand Alliance Order and everything pointy-eared or AELFs. So thanks for joining us for this video. Let's talk about elves, I guess. Or AELFs.
Yeah, let's do it.
Elves.
There is now so many of them, we get to do elves as their own faction, practically.
Yeah,
all of them in order, not all of them nice.
No, that's the good thing about Age of Sigmar. It's not like black and white, good and bad. It's all bad, pretty much. Even Sigmar's an a-hole, so we'll go on that. Well, when we get to that, the other side of Order, we'll talk about that. But yeah, so we're going to split the Order faction up because it's so big. So this video, it's all pointy-eared, stink funny elves if you're a goblin.
And trees.
If they're sort of elves, magical elf trees, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that Idoneth and Sylvaneth both have some kind of weird, strange kind of... if anything was going to be as close to a goblin as they could, they've got weird people appearing out of trees or without eyes or whatever, you know. Yeah. They look more like they are dwellers from somewhere that isn't positive, right?
There's a little bit of high fantasy mysticism about the elves, and it's quite nice. I quite like what they've done, to be honest. Yeah. Apart from one of the factions, when we get to it, when but yeah, spirit cows. So. For those who maybe not have seen this series before, what we're going to do is aimed at sort of newer players is to go through the overview of the factions, the models, the sort of the main players in that faction, and give you a little bit of the flavour of what they're about, where we think they are from a gameplay point of view, and at the end, we'll do a FACEHAMMER rating on if you're a new player and you're going to start an army, which ones are the best or the best ones to start with. You can, and disclaimer, you can start with any faction you want. You can play anything you want, and the most important thing is that you love what the models, because you've got to spend an awful lot of time painting them, some more than others. Yeah,
absolutely. So we're going to arm you with basically the wiki notes on the elven factions, and even the ones that we say aren't as good as others for new players. We will of course give some pointers on, you know, how you can push them in a direction that perhaps is a better place to start than, you know, the typical pitfalls. Because a lot of people, I think, will come to this on Lumineth, especially. Spoiler. Like a lot of them involve ways to start the game which are perhaps going to be more fiddly or tricksy or head screwy than others, or you just might have to paint 90 of the same model, which ain't great.
No. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start off with the big players in the Elven Order factions, and really there's two main ones, and that is Teclas and Murafi. So people
already hear someone complaining that you've not mentioned Hilarion.
She's there. She's just, I don't think she's as big. Like, you know, she's
her presence in
she's on the next slide
at least.
She gets a moment. We'll come to Fundifies in a minute. So Teclas from the world that was, he's the asshole. He's arrogant. He thinks he can fix everything. He's really up his own keister. He's the master of magic, the architect of trying to free the elven souls from Slaanesh. He's kind of a dick, right? But he's trying to do the right thing, but he's the sort of the guy that he turns up. He's probably right. You don't want him to be right, but at the end of the day, he's doing a good thing generally. But it still doesn't make you like him, right? That's just how I feel about him. Other people will be like, you could tell I'm not an elf player, right?
It's just like watching Italy beat us in the football.
Yeah, they deserve to win. You're not happy about it, right? So
game plan executed, not in the fashion that I would like, but respect. Yeah.
Don't hate the player, hate the game, right? That's the
first time we will ever have an on-point sporting reference. Yeah, that's the end of that. Let's get back
until the NFL season starts. Then it'll just be talking to myself. So Murafi, she's all out for number one. She wants to be powerful. She wants to be a god. And in the Broken Realm series, she attained godhood. Now you might wonder, why is there two of her? In the ritual, she split, so she's got two models for the price of one. from a background point of view, she's very cunning. She plays people off against each other. She's very snake-like, hence the big snake with wings. And she's what I would say probably one of the most interesting elven characters for me, just because the politicking and the kind of the backstabbing she gets away with.
Well, fluff-wise and gaming-wise, I think she is unique and interesting, and is a hot-listed for Best Wings in Warhammer award as well.
And gaming-wise, she is the... I will go out on a limb here and say that her War Scrolls, because there's two, is the best War Scroll in Age of Sigmar, hands down, for competitive play.
Agreed, and that's before you see her points value. You could almost say that, right?
And then it just
gets even better. Yeah, she is nuts. And what we mean by that is the fact that she can only take a maximum of 3 wounds a turn. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So no one else has that. Period. It is unique, and unique stuff that strong on a character that strong, who is also fast and a spellcaster and can hit really hard and is already in a really good army, is a big deal. So high likelihood.
Killed.
Yeah, high likelihood if you are collecting the army, you may start with her and never leave her in your lists.
If you're playing, for my recommendation, if you're playing Daughters of Khaine, she's auto-include. It takes up a last point in your army. It's a very nice model, so it's not too bad to build and paint. It's very textured, quite easy to do, and it's really interesting to play with. So 100% collector. Teclas is kind of the opposite. He's very techy. He's very difficult to use effectively, and he's all about magic.
He's a strategic kind of like. It's like a distance linchpin for your army, but isn't too easy to defend against and stuff like that. So I definitely say he's a potentially nearly as powerful, but more risky by far.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I think these points. If she was the same points as him, I'd say you could compare them, but he's so much more expensive that she wins hands down. Anyway,
she could be the same points as him.
We'll get there.
He's next.
So we've now got some of the other elven side. So we have Drycha Harmadeth, Alariel the Everqueen, and Volturnus, King of the Deep. So we've got Drycha, who's the kind of the messed up, nasty tree spirit. Alariel, who is the god, is a god, god of life in the war aspect. So people will know her from the world that was. She was grown from an acorn. There's a whole story about it with the Realm Gate walls. She's defending Gairan. She's kind of like the war. That's why she's so like Amazonian, because she's like the war aspect. Volturnus is just cool. He's like a pirate elf on a horse, but it's
it's just this page of models. Let's take a moment. These are all great, right? Like, what's not to like about war goddess of life on a mega beetle? Like freaky honeycomb nightmare, and then seahorse overlord. Like, it's fine.
Reminds me of the Walker from Aliens, like, because she's like in like a walking suit.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
I got a lot of time for the Sylvaneth aesthetic.
Mm-hmm. So these are the main players from the other two factions, such as the Sylvaneth and the Idoneth Deepkin. So there is also the Eidolon. They feature later, but they're not really a named character, so it's kind of difficult to include them. Plus, I ran out of space. So there you go. So we should start off with Daughters of Khaine.
We absolutely should.
So in terms of like a fluff or like lore blurb, so many are the tales told of the Daughters of Khaine. Those fearsome and bloodthirsty zealots who hail from the shadowed lands of Orgu, masters of blade and umbral magic, they seek out battle with manic fervour, for slaughtering foes and bathing in their blood grants them terrible power. Guided by the will of Murafi, the mysterious and cunning ruler, Khaine's faithful go forth in search of conquest and sacrifice.
Friendly people fighting in
it's not good people. So they're mostly female models as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's a really dynamic, fighty, aggressive, stabby looking army as well, isn't it? It's either like slithering snakes or like cavorting murder elves.
Yeah. And basically, they have the Khaine is the god of murder. Actually, people maybe don't know from the lore, Murafi's kind of tricked them all into pretending that she actually wants them to worship her, not the god of murder, and she kind of like uses that to control and manipulate them. She's not a nice person.
No, she sounds like she should be in Slanesh, doesn't she? Everything
Well,
about her, she would.
She stole her power from Slanesh because the Slanesh has
go.
all the elves' souls. So they're definitely the antithesis of Slanesh. They don't get on. And people in a world that was Khaine is very closely related to Khorne, which might have something to do with the dynamic there as well. But basically, they're sort of frenzied murder cult of murderers that murder people. The whole from the game, you get this like, as the game goes on, they get stronger because they get into a bloody frenzy, and they get more buffs that stack on top of them each battle round.
Most of them to do with reaching your opponents and hitting your opponents harder or more reliably.
Yeah, like +1 to hit or reroll charges, things like that. So as the game goes on, they get more powerful. They've also got this like ward save across the army, which is like called a daughter save. You have these cauldrons which can give you bonuses to your save depending on what temple you pick, and also they give you armor save bonuses. They got quite a strong emphasis on prayers. If you're playing with the they're not really mortal, but the non-snake stuff, sort of the non. I've got the name of them now because it's me, Melusai. So the non-Melusai type stuff, and then you've got the Melusai stuff that are more closely affiliated to Murafi, and they're sort of more the magic focus. So you've got the cauldron with the snake lady on it, and she's a caster, and Murafi's a caster, and the mix of the two can change the dynamic of your army quite a lot. In terms of gameplay, it's basically buckets of dice. They're like blenders. They're quite resilient, although they don't have much armor. They've got this ward save, and they've got ways to. They've got like the shields are very good on the infantry. They're quite fast. They're flexible. You've got a bit of shooting. You've got stuff that can drop from the sky in the Canary. Yeah. You've got the temples manipulate your armor quite heavy.
Yeah, you can pick a theme and go down that theme. Whether it's overall resilience to shooting, flexibility on the table, and that just involves you being from a different temple, which you just say you are, and maybe changing a couple 100 points worth of units, but very, very, very flexible. They've also got ways to fight or shoot out of sequence, particularly with Murafi involved. And we're going to keep talking about Murafi.
Can do it, right? So she can make you attack in the hero phase. They've got lots of ways to what I call powerful synergy.
Yeah.
So
not overly complex either. It tends to be this one thing benefits any of these in this way. Activate in your hero phase, or do this in the shooting phase, or do this prayer. And I think without prayers being stackable now, they've perhaps been simplified slightly. There's not quite the bookkeeping involved that was.
Well, you can stack prayers, you just can't. You can't do multiple off one hag anymore because they used to get more incantations. They also have invocations. And in the spells they've got both, which is a bit weird, but the snake invocation or spell is quite good because it can auto kill models, break coherency. So they effectively, if you look at the battle tab, you've got like units of like fast cavalry that are wizards that shoot in Doomfire Warlocks. You've got Canary that drop from the sky. You've got combat snakes. You've got combat witch elves. You've got Sister Slaughter that can pile in from outside of 6 to get around some mechanics. You've got shooting. You've got the Shadow Stalkers that can teleport around the table. You've got Murafi, which is so unique. You've got wizards. You've got big monsters. You've even got avatars of Khaine that you can animate, these statues that you can use prayers to animate. They're on the back of the cauldrons. You've got such a wide variety of units that can do everything. You've got prayers, you've got spells, you've got pretty much everything you need depending on what you want to do your army.
Yeah, so they're just missing high rend, basically, aren't they? That's the only thing that isn't
but
widely prevalent.
Really missing it because you can get rend 1 and you've got like rend 2 in places, and you've even got mortal wound output from the snakes. So
I was just gonna say that Murafi helps,
and Mind Razor
thing, as do snakes. Yep,
which just gives you. But yeah, so they are probably one of the stronger melee factions in the game.
Agreed.
If you want to lean into their melee, I kind of the shooting and the prayers kind of middle. The magic and prayers you might get a buff up or down depending on your list composition. Murafi skews this quite a lot. This diagram. So without Murafi, this will change quite a bit. But she's she contributes so much in terms of objective and resilience because she doesn't die in a one-er.
Yeah, and she's also insanely fast. And hits really hard. Everything.
And she buffs your shooting power and your magic, so she just gives you. She basically pushes all their points out by a significant margin. She's
within her own rights, and as a force multiplier, does a lot.
Yeah, so she's the linchpin of the army. The faction is very competitive. When we did our guide there, sort of S tier, we sort of think they're like one of the top factions in AOS.
Yeah.
Nice models. There are some of them a bit older, but that kind of helps because they're easy to assemble. And maybe that's something we should talk about with the models. So beautiful, really. But
yeah, insanely good. Something for everyone. Very flexible in terms of paint schemes as well. You know, your snake flesh could be a different color, your flesh flesh could be a different color, your wings could be a different color, and you can get away with pretty much whatever you pick. If you want them with, pastel blue skin and orange wings, nothing to stop you. If you want them dead dark and gritty and black and white and covered in blood, absolutely fine as well. And it's hard for a Daughter's Army to not look dynamic. I wouldn't say they are hugely easy to get on the table though, because there's quite a lot of picking out of bits and bobs, isn't there?
Depends on your list. Like if you go for like Murafi and snakes, it's fairly simple. Like my army, I've got a snake themed army, and it doesn't take a lot of money or time to get it ready. If you want cauldrons, they're a bit more complicated kit. You know, Khaine are a bit fragile. If you do like 30 witch elves, that's a bit of a task. But they're not like, I wouldn't say they're, I mean, you could do a horde army with daughters, or you could do a more elite one. They're both viable. I quite like the interchangeability of like the Sisters of Slaughter masks and the sort of the masks for the Khaine and the masks on the Melusai. So for me, I've used masks pretty much on all my models, so I don't want to paint faces. Do makeup. I just want to have bronze
well,
masks. Yeah, it does. Yeah, so like you can do a lot with that, and I've even mixed the Warcry warband, the sort of the serpent style warband, and I'm using them as my like hags and my kind of cauldron guard and things like that, because I want my army to look more dedicated to the Melusai element. Yeah, there's a lot you could do, but they're great range, not very expensive, good start collecting set. Shadow and Pain, the box set. I don't know if you can get ahead anymore, but that had a very good start for Daughter's Army. Murafi is also a great pickup. She's like a third of your army for like not too expensive. So yeah, great models really.
Yeah, solid all round. Describes Daughters pretty well.
So next faction will be the Idoneth Deepkin. So
slightly less well-rounded.
Yeah, they're a bit more specialist, but I quite like these guys. So
yeah, I got a lot of time for them.
So out of the blackness they come, emerging from the depths of the realm seas upon a surging tide of magic. Merciless raiders do not seek to slaughter or enslave. However, they are the Idoneth Deepkin. They have come to take their victims' very souls. They bring with them the magic of their kingdoms and an aether sea of rolling currents and crushing pressures. In their passing, the Idoneth leave ruin, death, and sleepers that will never awaken, victims whose souls have been stolen. Retreating beneath the waves, the Idoneth return to the utter isolation of the depths.
Wonderful.
So Teclas made a mistake here. He tried to free his elves. This was a kind of a failed experiment. And he's ended up with these sort of, as he calls them, abominations of elves, that he wanted to murder them all, and they all hid from him and went, nope, not murdering us. And so they basically, they're kind of like a bit messed up, right? So
yeah,
they need to steal souls from people to make sure their children can have a soul, because they're born soulless, and that's what the Namati are, basically. they hide in the depths of the realms in this what they call the ether sea. So when they attack, it's almost like the air is a sea, even though there's no sea. It's like a magical sea, this tide, and they've got a really cool mechanic with the tides. So you get this like the tide like comes in and comes out. It's like a wave crashing. So on the third battle round, when it crashes, you could be the second if you swap the tides with the tidecaster, but you get to fight first with your whole army. So they've got this like really cool aspect to them where they come out of nowhere and they raid, and it kind of fits into their play style.
Yeah, strong theme definitely carried through with their rules.
Yeah, and they kind of one of their rules is Forgotten Nightmares, which I think is a really cool rule. And they've got this like this tides, and they've got this soulless kind of aspect where they've got these like thralls that are all messed up that they're trying to that are like, you know, they're struggling to survive. They remind me a lot of Eldar from 40k. They're quite fast, they ambush, they're quite fragile with high damage. They've got a lot of synergy, but they're quite cavalry focused at the moment.
Like a plotting and planning army, aren't they? You could definitely, like, turn one, you make a plan and you try and stick to it. And you think, like, maybe I'm going to hold these people off for a couple of turns until I can focus my power here or whatever. I think they're a tactician's army, I would say, probably.
Yeah, you need to play. They could be like, they're really mobile, so they are really good at objective capture, but they're very fragile. But you can make them more resilient by taking things like the turtle, the Leviathan. They also, you can only shoot the closest unit, so they've got a natural shooting defense, and they've got access to the eels, which are kind of the linchpin of the army. You do have thralls on foot, you do have thralls with bows. You've also got the sharks, which are really good. They've got like net launchers which can stop people piling in. So they've got like these kind of synergy and stuff. If you're gonna collect Idoneth, you 100% need to get Broken Realms Murafi, because they changed some of the war scrolls.
Yeah.
So if you buy
the better.
So if you buy the current army book, you're missing out on stuff like mount traits for your sort of the king on the like the, I don't know I can't remember what it's called, but the eel thing, the seahorse thing, and also the Leviathan mount traits. And there's one which is like Void, Chill, Darkness, which is -1 to hit if you're within range of it, which is really strong.
Yeah.
The sharks got buffed, which is the Alapex, and the obviously the Leviathan got a buff. So if you're going to collect Idoneth, make sure you get Broken Realms Murafi as well as the Idoneth book, because you need the two together to play the faction. You can get the war scrolls on the website, but you won't get things like the mount traits and things like that. So it's a good idea to pick up both, which is a little bit of a barrier to entry. But shooting, they do have a bit. You've got shooting on the back of the Leviathan, you've got shooting on the Alapexes, you've got some Namati Reavers that can shoot, but it's not very good. Like, it's a compliment to the army,
specialist,
rather than unlike most order factions, you can't really write a shooting army. The shooting complements the army, but it's like, it's not, you can't write a shooting list.
No,
they're very fast, like really fast. You can the eels
flexible,
are nuts.
Come on from this,
all fly. So great. Even the Reavers can run and shoot, and they're like movement 8, I think. So melee wise, they're good, but they lack sustain. And one of the things I should mention is the Eidolons. They're sort of the big aspects of the Seal of the Storm. They're okay. They're a bit overpriced for what you get. The Eidolon, I think, got changed in Murafi as well. Adds an element to the army. You're quite low on magic. Like, I find getting magic in the army is quite hard.
They've got some good spells, but it's not their thing. Like, you can get buffs against multiple units, or buffs against multiple units, or stuff like that. But you just don't end up leaning in that direction, or have the reliance of casting quality, being large bonuses or anything like that, to be able to rely on it always.
Yeah, you've got like the Tidecaster, but it's the weaker one, and it's a bit overcosted. So not the Tidecaster, the Eidolon aspect of the sea. Yeah. The Tidecaster is probably something you include in every army, gives you a spell, but it's really there to flip the tides and give you your rituals, not
Mm-hmm.
for casting. And then like the Soul Render and the Soul Scryer, and they don't cast, so you're very limited on magic. They don't really
Decent
have
allies
prowess.
pool to counter it. But obviously, we're talking about the book itself and not its allies. But you know, you've got access to Stormcast and stuff, so you could get some more casters in there if you wanted. But yeah, the book itself is a little bit lacking there as far as power goes, at least.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think you're better off just leaning into what you're good at, and much as being a raider army and doing an
Yeah.
alpha strike, than you are worrying about that. An alpha strike just means you're fighting on your terms. You don't have to do it on the first turn. They're kind of better when you do it going into the third turn.
Patient army.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of early Idoneth players make the mistake of trying to do everything on turn one and then losing because they don't have the sustain. Whereas actually, if you play more patient and wait for the tide, they're good. You've also got the enclaves, so you can tweak your army depending on the enclave, which are all sub factions. So yeah, it's a really, really cool army. In terms of the models, I love them. They're like one of my favorite ranges.
Super distinctive, yeah.
I mean, you've got basically flying eels, sharks, and turtles with elves with a very strong nautical theme on, and like I love the Tidecaster. The Eidolons with their cloak of waves.
Yeah,
I think it's just beautiful.
because they're elves as well. If you don't like any one aspect, let's say you didn't like the heads or the helmets with the crests or something, it's really easy to swap these guys out for, you know, like hooded helmets from Sylvaneth, or you know, blackguard helmets from the old Daughters of Khaine, or like whatever it is. There's quite a lot of ability to swap between all of the elf ranges as long as they're not super dynamic poses like the Daughters, the actual witch elves or something. So it's just nice to have in your back pocket if you want to change one aspect of them.
Yeah, and I just, even the thralls I think are really cool.
Yeah, they are.
The whole army's very, very very nice in terms of miniatures. It's an elite army, so you don't need a lot, so it's not that expensive to collect. Some good box sets out there as well.
You can always start with a turtle included and an eidolon or something, and then at a later date swap them for, you know, 30 more dudes of some description or another. So quite a nice one for kind of a progressive customization of the army
as well. Because of the changes, a balanced list is fine. So like,
agreed.
If you play Idoneth and you go, I'm gonna have one of everything, like, you know, that typical like one of everything army, it's actually okay.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, agreed.
You know, I mean, obviously you probably want more eels than 3, but you know, it's like if you go, well, I'll have like 6 to 9 eels, a turtle, a couple sharks, some guys on foot, some guys with bows, an eidolon, and a character or two. And it's like, it actually wouldn't be that bad.
Yeah,
it's not optimum, but it would still be fine. You know, yeah, I really like the Idoneth. I'm a big fan.
very cool in alternate paint schemes as well. No issues with their paint scheme, but you can make them look evil or do some really, you know, lean into that Raiders theme, you know, pulling on whatever reference you want from whatever your favorite film or series is or something. Because
Aquaman.
There's plenty of scope. I was thinking more of like, you know, when you see like in like Firefly or from like sci-fi films, and there's these absolutely crazy people with, you know, like who've scarred themselves and damaged themselves, and everyone is petrified of them. That's how I would view being raided by this army. So I'd cover them in blood and just have them like seaborn nightmares, basically. I think
there are some really interesting dark schemes you can do with them.
Yeah, sure.
Going from dark and evil and soulless to
Cow hats.
Lumineth Realm-lords. So, graceful of mind as well as body, the Lumineth Realm-lords are the quintessence of all that is elven. Their speech is eloquent, and their mastery of arcane matters supreme. For the 10 paradises of Hish have been blessed them with uncanny intellect. The Lumineth consider themselves the most advanced of all living creatures, and they would gladly devote their entire existence to the furtherance of their own fields of expertise. But since the disasters of the Age of Chaos, they have recognized the need to take up arms in defense of the mortal realms, lest the cosmos be torn to shreds by the dark gods.
Fairly typical elvish fare. Haughty, good at stuff and know it, arrogant, and now they're going to go to war and they're going to try and be the best at it.
Yeah, so they're kind of these are New England Patriots of Age of Sigmar, right? From a few
And
seasons
sporting
ago.
reference.
Yeah, why not? So there you guys. They're like they're kind of like they're the ones who are like, we're good at everything. We're the best. We know better than everyone else. And they've got silly hats. There's quite a strong, almost like samurai Japanese kind of like discipline of like pursuit of perfection thing going on with
Martial
the new
excellence.
Yeah, so the problem is rather than the pursuit of it, they just think they're already there. So, that's the but they kind of got this elemental aspect of the winds of Hish, and you've got like they've got like the stone temple and the wind temple. They're very martial, so they've got like a traditional citizen levy. They're very much like the high elves of old.
Imagine blocks of them all doing their very specific task.
You could look like a Roman legion with the army.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Phalanx of spearmen, archers, ballistas, cavalry, banner. If you really want to go down that route, you could write a really nice Orion Legion phalanx army. It'd look amazing.
And then just drop in a flying fox with a bow for the lols.
Or you could go the opposite way and go, I'm going to have a load of bouncy kangaroos and a stone cow, and that's completely fine too. Or the list that Tom was putting in the chat the other day with 5 foxes in it, which I just want to go and like, yeah, it's not fun. So they're kind of martial, they're magic heavy, shooting heavy, they're elite, they're fast. These guys pretty much have everything you could ever need to deal with anything, and they've got the best, most undercosted shooting unit in the game with Sentinels.
Yeah, they are obscenely good.
Don't need line of sight, 30-inch range, do mortal wounds. They're wizards as well. You can buff their shooting with spells and their battle line for every unit of wardens you have, which you will have a couple. So they're just like, they're just
no-brainer.
Yeah, and Teclas pushes their magic up to 11. They've got a lot of their units are wizards. They've got very strong spells. You've got access to some good melee units. Their objective capture can be good because you've got things like Lore Seekers and Blade Masters that can protect the Lore Seeker. You've even got the Alarith Temple, which are like the stone guys, which are actually quite resilient. Even Dawn Riders are fast, can get there. So they've got a really good mix of units and a really good suite of tools to deal with pretty much with any situation. Probably the biggest range of models that any faction.
And they're super modern as well. All of this stuff is like
it's only come out last year.
Last year or two max.
I think this time last year, I think the box set came out.
This is why a huge part of why they're so popular. They're hugely distinctive. A lot of people have got a lot of time for the olden elven ideals, and that's been carried through. Questionable helmets aside, some people love them, some people don't. They're very mighty. That's been carried through, and there is a version of this army to suit everyone and anyone. It can be a bit skitsy because you end up with like everyone does their exact thing. Like your kangaroos are super fast, super shooty, can't take a hit. Or you've got like Stone Guard who are a lot slower. There's spells that you can alter that with, but on their War Scroll, they're a lot slower, very stoic and slow and steady. And you have a fox zipping around the table or that type of stuff. So each unit in the army has its own thing, but there is something for every aspect of the game.
They've got a lot of named characters as well. You've got like Spirit of Elfarian, you've got like the Eleandra and whatever the other guy's name is, the 2 twins. You've got even Severith, the aspect of the wind, the fox bow guy who can move around in your opponent's turn and stuff. It's just kind of like they've got pretty much everything. Like, so you can write army lists. The suit model wise,
I say quite expensive as an army.
The army's expensive to collect because they are modern kits, but they're also quite pricey.
Yeah.
They're also, as you can probably tell, like you can see on here, I've got like the Sentinels, I've got like the Dawn Riders, I've got some of the Wind Chargers. Very dynamic. Like there's a lot of movement in the models. They're also quite tricky to build.
And paint.
So they are, I would say, not as a modeling project, they are advanced. It will take a long time to get them to table, and they are an army that requires a lot of painting.
Potentially frustrating for first timers.
Could be
for sure.
I think if you don't sequence it right, it will be hard, right?
Yeah. and you can they are, because they're modern, these have been designed in the days of contrast. So if you take a base coat and contrast approach to each of the aspects, there are still like 12 different aspects per model, rather than like the 4 that you'd like. But you can do a super solid job like that, or pick a heavily armored theme, dry brush them all silver, wash the silver, and then pick out your leather bits and your straps and your bloody tassels and stuff like that.
I got Byron Bingo. So someone on a comment on one of our videos said, like, Byron mentioned that you need a Byron Bingo card. So he mentions tassels. So I've just got tassels down on bingo. I wasn't going to mention it until you mentioned it. I thought I'll wait till you mention it. But yeah.
Tassels, faff. Yeah. But a lot of appeal. If you go down particular routes, I think there's some very efficient ones to get looking really cool, really fast. They're probably not going to be the most diverse list, but if you went like heavy duty sentinels who are quite points heavy, you wouldn't have to paint Stone Guard. The exact opposite. You could have quite a small elite force, still fun to play, and then gradually build out into other things, or include some more of the big guys in there or whatever. But super distinctive, but just a little bit high maintenance as far as the building and painting goes.
Yeah, I mean they are what they are. I mean, if you like the aesthetic of them, and you're not going to be let down from a gaming point of view, that's for sure. They may be a little bit advanced to use, but from a gaming point of view. But
I think that the front, if you have this army and you play it in your gaming group, and this will be common for a lot of people who've played with it, I think. Let's say you build your first iteration of the list, you kind of get to grips with that, you go in your gaming group and you play some games with people. There's a very good chance that after a little bit of practice, you'll be wiping people off the table. You could then go to an event against people who have, a higher level of play or are more experienced at beating hard to beat armies or whatever, and have a very, very confusing weekend. Because if someone gets into you and your plans start slipping, I think they can crumble quite fast. They're very strong, but they do require a fair degree of finesse to operate, I would say.
Yeah.
What do you feel about
that? Yeah, exactly that. So they're a very, very strong army, but you need to play them well. They're a finesse piece. They're not a
less forgiving than daughters. Yeah, less forgiving than daughters by a long degree.
By a way big margin.
You could move one unit up where you shouldn't have, and then your plan could really start crumbling at that point. Or your opponent, you left a gap for your opponent to teleport something behind you.
So I think in the hands of experienced player, these are also S tier, but in a newer player, I would drop these down a tier because, it's harder to get the most out of them. Yeah, maybe possibly 2, depending on the experience. So I think if you're an absolute beginner, I'd say they're probably like a C tier, or maybe a B tier. Sorry. And then if you're like if you're okay, bit experienced, you're probably A. If you're a really good player, they're probably S tier. So, whereas I think daughters just stay at S and maybe drop to A, but they don't really move from there.
Agreed. Yeah, daughters are not nearly so reliant on things like having a 1-drop formation, so you can get in your techie, your combo that you've worked out, so you can do that before your opponent gets to play. You want to be playing on your terms as Lumineth, and daughters you don't mind nearly as much, for example.
No, because you can't lose your linchpin of your army, because you can't die in a turn, so even if you missed player...
Can't die in 3 turns.
And all you've got to do is add in Go Trek to really upset people, but we won't talk about that. So, the last Elven faction, sort of Elven.
Elves and Trees.
So,
can I read this one?
Yeah, you can go for it.
The spirit song rises and the Sylvaneth march to war. The air sings with glorious life magic as the children of Alariel surge into battle. Sentient wildwoods burst from the heaving ground, and fleet-footed forest spirits race forth to wreak ruin. I picked a bad one. Upon the enemies of nature.
Well.
A cry of vengeful fury echoes out across the mortal realms as wargroves of the glades advance along ancient paths to strike out at their foes. At their head marches Alariel, the Everqueen herself, a goddess of life reborn in her aspects of war. These are the nicer sounding ones so far, aren't they? Yeah,
they are. These are out of all the Elven factions, these are probably the nice ones. So
you're marching to war and killing people with sticks.
Yeah, but they're kind of just defending their trees, right? So they're not. They're a bit nasty. They're kind of a bit spiteful. So I've picked up this kind of. They've got this whole realm roots idea where they travel through the roots and they kind of like come out the trees. So This army like works around terrain. So like you have like
Heavily.
these things called wildwoods, and you spring them up at the beginning of the game, and you can summon new woods, and they're quite integral to how the army plays.
Yeah, if you cast spells close to them, they can explode on your opponents and stuff like that. Like various linchpins around the board, you would say, or
Yeah, you
key
almost
pieces.
want these like little hubs of like where to fight from or where to use your magic from, and it's not massively, but it does make a difference. They're kind of like flexible in terms of maneuverability. They're quite elite, and I kind of got this term like guerrilla warfare. They kind of feel the
Absolutely.
most kind of guerrilla faction.
Pop in a zone, handle that zone, maybe disappear.
And they're quite balanced in terms of like what you can put in the list. They're a little bit more limited than like Lumineth and Daughters. They don't really have the breadth of units that they have. They're also a little bit on the weak side from a gameplay point of view.
But we've almost got just a complete hexagon here. It's only their mobility that's popping out from the 3 zone, isn't it?
Yeah, so essentially they're just in the middle of everything. They tend to have good armor, but not good ward saves.
Yeah.
And which means that like anything that does mortal wounds is a real problem. They've got low bravery on a lot of their units. So your units are big units of dryads and things like that, although they're quite resilient if they're in the woods and they're buffed, you need to put resources in to keep them alive. Alariel
Got some access to healing as well.
Yeah, so they've got some good healing. Like Alariel is kind of like she can summon a unit, she can heal the army, she can heal herself. Their endless spells are quite good. But magic is weird. Like you get like wizards, but they're not very good casters. Even like the Tree Lord Ancient only has a spell. I think the War Song Revenant, which is the new hero that was in Kragnos, he's like a bit of an exception because he gives you a 2-cast wizard. It's just quite a good model. It's quite expensive. Like you have to pay a lot of points for him, but he's kind of like necessary.
It feels 1+ almost, doesn't it?
Yeah, because the army really needs the help with the spells and the spell lore, and they've got great artifacts. Their artifacts are amazing.
They are really good.
I would say that like they're one of the armies that like they're not bad, but they're not good. Like they're kind of like just in the middle. Like
just solid, yeah.
If you're playing against experienced players, like the mobility can be shut down quite easily. Because you're restricted on how you use that. They do have like the sort of the Tree Revenant guys, which can teleport with their way pipes, which is a bit more flexible than because they can go for the board edges. And you also got I think one of the War Groves can do a bit more shenanigans with teleporting. But yeah, they're kind of like quite tough to play with competitively, I would say. But as a beginner, I think they're quite a good army.
I'd say so. I think, and the toughness you can combat, they just require a bit more practice, I think. And probably for you to find your way into your type of list for them, because there's a lot of different ways you could go with their lists. And once you found one that gels with you and your experience with it, and you've played various types of different forces with it, worked out your core battalions or your items or whatever it is to kind of balance those weaknesses, they do have potential. But I don't think it's not something that's going to happen fast.
No, and they used to have like I would say like the strongest kind of like monstrous infantry in the game, and other stuff's kind of caught up and surpassed them.
Yeah,
and they've stayed quite expensive for what you get. And I think that if you want to do an army that's quite self-sufficient, then you can go for stuff like Tree Lords, Durfu, the Hunters, the sort of more monstrous stuff. And you're not too worried. But I think to really get the most out of the army, you need to use the synergy and you need to use the special rules. And there's a lot of overlapping of stuff. And as a newer player, it's harder to unlock that.
Just get grips with. I think a lot to learn at once while you're learning your own very varied war scrolls, because it's not like you don't have lots of things that do the same thing. Kind of like Nighthaunt, for example. There's a lot of things that do different stuff. And then the synergies and the buffing or the abilities is another layer of things to kind of get to grips with in the context of what is still quite a varied army.
And a lot of Sylvaneth players normally want to take the first turn to get the board position with growing their trees, whereas that actually puts you on a back foot because you're always facing a double turn back. And and also in the new edition you only get one command point, not two. But then the tree positioning can be super important. It's not so much anymore. It used to be like really, really important in the army, but now with the changes to how wildwoods are deployed, you can put 3 individual trees down at the start of the game, so you can kind of create your linchpin of space without worrying too much. So, I mean, they're a good army. I think you will have a harder time with your games than if you played Daughters or Lumineth or even Deepkin. I think they're the hardest one to use at the 4.
Yeah.
Should we talk about models?
Yeah.
Because they are beautiful.
They're such a cool aesthetic, and you've got 2 very distinct aesthetics as well. There's the woody stuff, and there's the less woody stuff.
Yeah, and there's not much elf to these. Like, in terms of painting, like assembly can be a little bit tricky because of a lot of spindly bits. Some of the kits are quite old, like the Dryades are very old.
They are ancient.
But like once you've got them assembled, they paint really easily with contrast, dry brushes, coloured sprays.
Yeah, you can get a good job quick. Like really, you could have an extremely impressive looking army given the minimal amount of time spent, as long as you approached it with a good game plan. Absolutely.
Yeah, and like stuff like even the guys you can see here, you can do them in sub assemblies, so their torsos. You could spray those white and put achromatic blue over them. You could spray the bodies brown and put a wash on it, and then glue them together. Pick out the bits in green. You're basically done.
Yeah.
They're quite cool as well if you want to stick like clump foliage on them. Like if you can do
autumn leaves, mushrooms, ferns, anything.
So you've got this kind of like seasonal aspect. So people do like winter themed when they've got like snow and they're kind of colder wood, or you can do summer and you put lots of like greenery on them, or autumn, which is quite orangey and stuff, or spring, which is very bright and kind of like, there's some really cool things leaning into the 4 seasons and that kind of old aesthetic. Model kits are cheap
as well.
Yeah,
like because there's often this thing where order is less forgiving to convert than chaos, because chaos is chaotic and a bit more messy. But these guys, because of the organic nature of the trees and whatever, you can get away with, if you don't like the position of your tree man, you can build him, then rip his shoulders off and reposition them however you want. I made one of mine be firing a bow, for example. And people can't tell, and all I've done is just jammed a bit of plastic in the hole I made, covered it in plastic glue, and then dry brushed it, and it just blends in with the other organic material. Or you could literally stick, like tufts there and have them growing out of him. So quite a cool, like a very, very cool one if you're into modelling, for sure. And you could go as evil or as joyful as you like, whether it's flowers or nightmares, or anything in between.
Nightmare flowers.
Yeah.
I mean they're great. From a hobby point of view, fantastic, quick to paint. Models are cheap. Generally you can get hold of them.
Start collecting and stuff like that.
Yeah, and like there's quite a lot of them around. They've been around a long time, so even if you're on a budget and you want to get secondhand stuff, you can pick it up fairly cheap. So also you don't need that much for an army. So I think they're quite a good army to start with in that regard.
Yeah, I think there's long been that. There's enough Dryads kicking around the world. Interesting story, actually. One of the first things I ever painted when I was a commission painter was a unit of Dryads, and I ended up accidentally buying them back myself from eBay unknowingly 3 years later.
That's
the same one, didn't I? I opened the box and was like, whoa, deja vu.
They look familiar.
Yeah, they were mine. So they matched my army perfectly.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bizarre. But so ratings then.
Yeah.
This might not come as too big of a shock, really. With these ratings it's a combination of budget, painting and hobbying, how good a player need to be to unlock the army, and the kind of the journey from box to table.
On average, so obviously you could completely lean in the ways that we've suggested to get something on the table faster, or to take a list that is less complex to play, or anything like that. But on average, this is what we've given them out of 5 FACEHAMMERs.
Yeah, so Daughters of Khaine, 4.5. Basically, if you lean into the snakes, I think they're a lot easier to get on the table than if you're doing lots of infantry. Okay. When you get into the table, they're going to be great. Like, you're not going to need to be an advanced player to unlock the most out of this.
You're gonna learn in a more forgiving manner, and what we mean by that is, if you make a mistake, your game is not over.
Yeah.
And that's not us criticizing them for being strong or anything. It just is what it is. But as a new player, you need a bit more time to kind of trick. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have put them there. If you put your, I don't know, your Lumineth Realm-lords there, and that's the wrong place, you may well lose the game. If you put your daughters there, and that's the wrong place, there's a good chance that that hasn't cost you the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can make your units resilient. You've got the buffs are fairly straightforward where they go. It's kind of quite obvious what you do with it. Murafi's kind of a bit of a, to get the most out of her, you need to be fairly good with what you're doing with her. But to be honest, she can't die, so you're going to get lots of turns to practice with her. So yeah, great army for starters.
Absolutely.
Idoneth, I've got 4.5, which might raise a couple eyebrows, but
is that 4.5 for convenience?
It's purely for the models. Like if you want to just paint, they're cool models. They're fairly easy to paint. The army is, you don't have a lot of war scrolls. You don't have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
You've got a tide table, which is still the same. There is some complexity to it, but it's not really. You're not really doing buffs and synergizing. Most of the rules are on the war scrolls, so you just read the war scrolls.
They happen to everything each turn.
Yes.
You don't have to go and refer to this in reference to this. It's just, it is turn 3, therefore I am going first, which is, that's one thing to remember instead of like 7, which is quite good actually.
They're a lot of fun.
I hadn't considered that
as well.
They are.
Like
to play with or against too, which is a nice thing.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Like I think like just having like a turtle, 2 units of eels, couple sharks, an eidolon, a dude on a horsey, maybe a foot hero and a unit of infantry with bows or something, and you've got a really nice army. It looks cool. It plays nicely. It's not complicated.
Hyper easy to adapt and evolve over time as well, because they're quite elite. You can drop out, changing 400 points is a matter of far less models than it would be for someone else. I've taken my turtle out. I will put,
6
of
eels
these,
or
and
2 sharks and a hero, or a unit of 30 thralls or something.
And very soon you've got a huge pool of models to pick from, and they're all going to be dead cool. Also, obviously, you can spend all of your time googling tropical fish or animal markings or whatever it is, and there is a huge spectrum of forgiving paint schemes out there which will look super solid on the table.
Yeah, coloured sprays is a good way to paint them.
If you've got an airbrush, there's even stuff like you could have animal marking templates and spray that over a fairly wobbly transition, and suddenly it'd look amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just great. Even like lots of hobby opportunity as well. If you don't have to do like resin bases with water effects or anything like that if you don't want to, but you can, and it's awesome. So if you're a bit of a hobbyist, I think they're a great army as well, because there's a lot you can do with the basing. So much you can do with that.
That's a very good point. They're not standing on their bases for a lot of the models, so you can just do whatever you like under there, whether it's building an underwater castle or whatever you like.
Yeah, putting like goldfish bowls around all your units or something. So Lumineth Realm-lords. So I've got them
at, I would have put them
2.5 because they're very strong, but you need to be a good player to unlock the strength. The hobby aspect of it is a massive turn off for me. I've built a lot of model kits, and I generally don't mind building kits. I've painted a lot of models. I'm not that big. I don't really enjoy painting as much as some people. I can say that the Lumineth Realm-lord kits are some of the worst that I've had to build and paint. I had a commission to do the box set, and they were a massive time sink. And I'm not saying that they're not fun, but if your goal is to get something done quickly, this isn't the army. And normally,
their 2,000 points could take 3 times longer than an average army's 2,000 points. And that's not me being, hyperbolic or exaggerating for anything. Like, factually, that is exactly where I would put them at. If you compared them to Deepkin or anything else on this list, at least 2 times longer. And, more fiddly, more breakable along with it, more different sections
and they've also got stuff like managing the Aether Quartz reserves for a new player. It's another resource to manage.
7,000 once a game abilities.
Yeah,
like the most once a game abilities out of any book ever in the history of Warhammer.
And it's just like complexity of play. I think when you're trying to learn a game, you don't want to have to be like thinking about all this extra stuff on top and
all these extra spells to list.
You want to get your army on the table quickly so you can play more games, right? So like having an army that takes longer. That's the only reason I scored them low. I think they're a great army. I'm not saying they're a bad army, but it's just as a beginner. I mean, if you love them, you love them, and that's fine.
Yeah, you do.
But
you will make them work.
I had the issue when I started AOS and I wanted an army quickly, and I had my Khorne. I love the Khorne models, and I started to try and paint them properly, as in like paint all the different individual areas and highlight all the armor trim and that. And I went, I'm never going to get this army painted. A year's going to go by, and I'm not going
to change course completely.
And I just went,
the army.
I just went, well, I either paint them in concept black and white with blood and lava bases to look cool. I can get them on the table really quickly, and I can have a lot of fun gaming, or I do something else.
Them. Yeah,
I chose to dry brush them. So it's right cool.
Number of pieces in the kits as well. Like there's just a lot of stuff. Literally a lot of stuff.
Yes. And as a new player, it's a bit daunting, and you might start off and go, do you know what? I'm really not enjoying this process because it's not as fun. You might do. I mean, sure. I know people that love Lumineth, and like, you know, I think if you're a good painter, advanced painter, or hobbyist, they're a really cool kit. That they've got lots of stuff you can do with them. You don't have to paint the trim a different color. I'd recommend not to do that if you're trying to do them quickly.
Yeah, or wash paint it all the same color and then spot wash the recesses with a contrast or a shade.
Yeah, so basically the armor will be white and then put apocryphy on it, and then so you don't have to like pick out the trim a different color to the armor. Because I had to do a commission and I had to do the trim in orange and the armor in black, and the black armor had to be gloss and the trim had to be matte, and it was it took like 3 times the length of time that it should take.
Absolutely.
So
a couple of little tricks for them: doing the metallic and then using that wash and the recesses trick, and then just picking out your other stuff in like base coat wash. Really, really solid approach to it. If you are experiencing frustration with your games, know that you're not alone. You know, they're not the easiest army out there, and it's particularly frustrating potentially when people are saying how strong they are. So hopefully this has provided a bit of insight into that. Restrict the amount of scrolls you have, and maybe take a more simple temple or something like that. You know,
I would say stick to Orion Legion. Like, so if you're starting with Lumineth, start with the Wardens, the Sentinels, the Dawn Riders, a couple heroes, and maybe a Ballista
monster or something,
and maybe an Avalon or something like that, and then you just stick to the basics. And the good thing about that stuff, that gives you the foundation to build into other temples, and you can mix and match a unit in as you feel fit. And then if you really like a certain unit, then you could then deep dive into that temple. So I would start with that template. Start with the Wardens and Sentinels and Dawn Riders, and then from that grow. Don't start off with Wind Chargers, you know, because you're gonna struggle.
Oh, they're very techy. You do not have to have Teclas in your army either. I think that's a common misconception.
I wouldn't start with him.
Huge selection of builds.
If I was a new player, I just wouldn't start with him. He makes the army even harder to use effectively.
More extreme.
Because you can have a game where he dominates and another game where he gets killed on turn 1 and you lose, and it's just that balance isn't there for me. And although you can mitigate that alpha, like if you're not experienced, you're going to get caught out with gotcha moments, and then having a 700 point model that dies in a turn before you even used him, it's not going to feel good.
Going to war with the world's sharpest scalpel.
And Sylvaneth at 3.5. Hobby wise, fine, really good,
solid. Affordability wise, good.
Yeah, they are until you add on the Wildwoods. So as soon as you add up the army, you go, that's not too bad. Then you go, I better build some Wildwoods. We should mention as well, like Idoneth have the boat and Lumineth have a big temple, so they've got terrain as well. Daughters don't have terrain, which is another barrier you don't have. You don't have to take it, but you kind of do. So like the shipwrecks for Idoneth are fairly easy to paint, but they're you know, and then like the Lumineth temple thing could be quite daunting. It's quite big. And then from Sylvaneth you need Wildwoods, which adds to the cost.
Woods plural.
More than one. You need at least 2 boxes, I would say. It adds almost 100, but it almost doubles the cost of the army, to be honest, when you start adding in the Wildwoods. which is a bit weird, but so it's probably about half again, I'd say. So about a third of the cost will be on terrain. Also, it makes it difficult to transport it if you're moving around to events and stuff, or gaming clubs.
Second accessories box. It's like having a summoning pool.
Yeah, and I would say that, like, from a gaming point of view, they're not too bad, but you're going to struggle to win games purely because they need a little bit more play and a little bit more luck.
Find your way with them. Absolutely got to find your way. Your shtick with the army, how it works for you.
And to give you an idea of like tiers, like Daughters and Lumineth are S, Idoneth are kind of up there in A, Sylvaneth are probably right down there in like C or D tier. It's like, they're not from our opinion anyway, but they're not sort of dominating. They need a little bit of love. They're kind of a bit of an older book.
Loads of flexibility in writing lists, kind of fun. Everything is internally very well balanced, and then you are probably going to have to play your tits off on the table. So not unlike Slaanesh, but I would say they are under Slaanesh in terms of power.
I think so, because I think Slaanesh has got like more raw power in terms of like the flexibility of going into Slaves to Darkness and allies and things like that, whereas Sylvaneth are a bit more like restricted. Not a bad army, but just be aware that you're giving up a little bit of power for a little bit more easy modeling.
Shout out to living city armies in the City of Sigmar, which can include a heavy proportion of Sylvaneth. So if you've got some kind of verdant landscape or evil haunted mechanic or whatever, do take a look at that part of the book. It's a strong book, very flexible book. You could have wild riders in there. You could be leaning heavily on models that were formerly from Wood Elves that fit really nice into the aesthetic. You can have stags running everywhere. It's perfect. So if you perhaps really like the idea of it and then don't like what we said about the gaming, don't let that put you off. Take a look over there, and it opens up a far wider pool of things that you could put in as well. You could have like stone stormcast with shrubberies growing from their shoulders. Whatever it is, there's quite a bit of flexibility there, and it's quite a cool book too.
I would say that the Cities of Sigmar we'll cover in a different video, but if you're a returning player from the world that was, it's a fantastic place to start because you can basically rebase a lot of your old models. They're a very heavy converting army, but we won't spoil too much of that. That'll be the next order video. But Sylvaneth have a heavy influence in there, along with Kharadron Overlords and Stormcast. So you can really, if you want to go like bin bag of Order War Scrolls,
Order really All Stars. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm only joking, but if you want to go Order All Stars is probably the best way to describe it. And Sylvaneth give you it into that faction. So if you start with Sylvaneth, you could then broaden out if you're struggling with your gaming side. And also, if you've got some of the old Wood Elf models, you could use them. You touched on already, like Wild Riders and things like that, and even like Wood Elf Archers could proxy for Handgunners and stuff like that if you wanted to.
Yeah, completely.
It's some of the War Scrolls have gone away, but the Cities of Sigmar is fairly flexible, and if you base your army in Gairan, and you're saying, well, it's this living city in Gairan, and there's some good literature as well from the Black Library around Sylvaneth, and some of the early sort of Hallowed Knight stories with Nurgle is in the Realm of Life, so it's kind of fits all in there. So it's lots of heavy theme stuff you can do from a narrative point of view. So yeah, definitely not a bad faction, but I don't think they're quite as beginner friendly or accessible as some of the others, so that's why they're 3.5. I mean, none of these, every army can be a good beginner army if it's what you want to collect, because it's down to what you like.
Absolutely.
But
we completely encourage if anything out of what we said has put you off something and you've got any questions or anything like that, please do let us know down below. We'll be honored to help you out, make your army work for you in whatever way is possible. And I'm sure some other people will be able to pitch in as well, maybe players of the army who've had the same issues that you have, and everyone pitch in, help out, why not?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that about wraps it up for this video. We'll follow up with probably a Chaos faction video, then we'll go back to Order and back to Chaos again, and then it should wrap up all of the factions. So there's quite a lot more to cover. So if you've not checked out the other videos in the series, we've done Death and Destruction in their entirety. And if you're new to the channel, we do all Age of Sigmar content, whether it's mostly around competitive play, list analysis. We will be doing tournament reports once we're actually doing them and COVID's kind of subsided.
I have one in far too few weeks, and I haven't started my army.
Yeah, that's a bad thing, right?
going to Alex Gaystar's event, which I'm super looking forward to, and should be an amazing crowd of bros. So
So
yeah,
the
there will be
Mancurian
some
Carnage.
yeah. There will be some commentary on that and exactly how much against it I am painting wise.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's when is it? Is it the end of this month or?
The literal end, the 31st of this month and the 1st of the next.
Oh, okay, cool. So yeah, we'll look forward to hearing your report. I'm not there, so I don't think I'll get to play until like November. So I don't think I've got anything booked up, but other than practice games. But my army's still in boxes behind me, as you can see. So it's probably not a good thing. But yeah, well, thanks for checking the video out. Like and subscribe to the algorithm stuff. We do live streams and stuff like that as well. Join the Discord, join the community, say hello, and you can talk lists and stuff. If you are a beginner and you want any advice or anything in this video, you want some clarification, again, as Byron said, put it in the comments and we'll get back to you. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Yeah, cheers, guys. Any specific questions, we have a little bit of the Discord for each of the factions, so you can go in there and ask chaos questions or order questions or whatever you like, and there are literally hundreds of people who will be happy to help.
Exactly. All right, thanks for watching. See you soon.
See you in a bit, guys. Bye.